At the small airfield of La Ferté-Alais, near Paris, the cockpit of a Sud Aviation SE-210 Caravelle, the Western world's first medium short-range twin-jet airliner, and the first anywhere to have its engines mounted on the rear fuselage, awaits its move to Munich, Germany. Built in 1960, this airframe section has been in limbo for more than 3 decades. Some 37,000 flying hours, 18,000 landings, outside storage and souvenir hunters have left their scars. In 2012, an airline pilot with a passion for the elegant Caravelle acquired the corroded relic with the aim to restore it to life. Gradually, this artifact of the early jet age will be transformed into a time machine, simulating in great detail the atmosphere, sounds, handling and operation of the revolutionary French jetliner. This is the beginning of a long and complex restoration project that links us to the 50s. The Caravelle was created in Toulouse, southern France, by the designers and engineers of the Société Nationale de Sud-Est, the forerunner of Sud Aviation. In a convoluted process that began shortly after the end of World War II, the basic layout of what was to become the SE-210 had evolved by the end of 1951. A year later, the definitive design, powered by Rolls-Royce Avon turbojets, was chosen as the preferred proposal by the French government, which had instigated a competition for a moyen courrier, medium-range commercial aircraft. An accord between Sud-Est and de Havilland in England, makers of the 4-jet Comet, extended their existing cooperation regarding military aircraft to civil aviation. The manufacturers agreed to facilitate the interchangeability of engines, parts, equipment and accessories, as well as exchange technical information and market analyses. Although directed to emulate the Comet's construction, Sud-Est engineers were uneasy with de Havilland's methods based on experience with licensed production of the Vampire and Sea Venom. They therefore adopted different materials and structural strengthening for the Caravelle, which resulted in one of the most durable airframes to fatigue phenomena of any contemporary airliner. After the catastrophic Comet in-flight failures, there was a considerable sigh of relief in France that Sud-Est had taken a more conservative engineering approach. 2 complete cockpit sections were, however, acquired from de Havilland for the 2 Caravelle prototypes. The Comet cockpit was already approved by French and British airworthiness authorities, and Sud-Est hoped that Comet customers, which already included Air France and Aero Maritime UAT, would choose the Caravelle for medium-range routes. Despite the difference in numbers of power plants, the similarity would be an advantage in training crews. In the event, the anticipated design and tooling costs were not saved because, following the Comet disasters, Sud-Est had to re-engineer the cockpit section for production Caravelles. Evaluation of stepped V-shaped windscreens was also undertaken, but the aerodynamically superior shape was retained. Construction of the first Caravelle prototype started in mid-1953 and was structurally complete by November 1954. After fitting out and final checks, number 01 made a successful first flight on May 27, 1955. The second prototype flew in 1956 and had a complete passenger cabin. This aircraft undertook a sales tour of North and South America that did much to dispel doubts about the safety and reliability of a twin jet. 2 more airframes were used for fatigue testing and structural evaluation, which proved beyond question the soundness of the design.
Nothing is left to chance in the quest of knowledge. Complete fuselages are immersed in great tanks, like old shipwrecks. They are subjected to severe water pressure tests.
The first production Caravelle flew in 1958 and undertook function and reliability trials early the following year. A rigorous 3,000-hour flight test program culminated in April 1959 with both French and, significantly, US Federal Aviation Agency type certificates. While Air France had become the first announced customer for the Caravelle in 1955, the order was viewed by many outsiders as a foregone conclusion, given that both airline and manufacturer were state-owned concerns. In 1957, the internationally renowned Scandinavian Airlines System, SAS, chose the Caravelle. Orders followed quickly from Varig of Brazil, Finnair, Air Algérie and Royal Air Maroc, then Alitalia, Sabena and Iberia. A major breakthrough came in 1960 with an order for 20 Caravels from United Airlines, and there was talk of a second production line being established at Long Beach, California by Douglas Aircraft. To meet the production timetable, an efficient decentralized manufacturing plan was created with final assembly in Toulouse. This method, which had been employed in France by Sud-Est early in the 1950s for the four-engined Armagnac program, was greatly expanded for the Caravelle. In total, more than 400 enterprises were involved, of which nearly 150 were involved in the construction of the airframe. 5 other Sud Aviation plants contributed complete airframe assemblies, along with Lateco Air, Breguet and Fiat in Italy. It was a blueprint for the subsequent multinational processes adopted by Airbus Industrie.
C'est au début, quand je suis entré à Sud Aviation, j'y suis rentré comme riveur, apprenti riveur, un mois de stage. Ouais. Bon, alors on nous donnait des plaques d'aluminium, comme ça, là, assez rigides, hein, assez épaisses, percées de trous, un pistolet pneumatique avec une boutrole au bout, et un bout de ferraille comme ça, là, un torque, on appelait ça, TRS, où on s'amusait on mettait des rivets et on s'apprenait à mettre des rivets et à les mettre bien droits. Alors, quand vous n'en avez pas l'habitude, au début, ça partait de tous les côtés. Alors, quand je suis arrivé dans l'atelier, il y avait le châssis de la pointe avant et on recevait les panneaux. Les panneaux qui étaient encollés tout autour, hein, et il les plaquait sur le châssis. Et là, il y avait des monteurs qui les épinglaient. Ils épinglaient les panneaux. Voilà. Et quand quand la colle était sèche et que tout allait bien, les monteurs, ils enlevaient les vis et tout. Et nous, on arrivait derrière avec le pistolet pneumatique et un collègue qui était de l'autre côté avec ce bout de ferraille là, et on commençait à poser les rivets. Voilà. C'était... Eh bien, des fois, on doublait les équipes. On restait 16 heures en train de mettre des rivets. Hein? Alors, des fois, il nous faisait venir de 4 heures à midi. Hein? À 4 heures, on arrivait sur place. Bon. Et le chef d'équipe, il nous disait « Attendez, je vais me renseigner, on va voir ce qu'il y a à faire ce matin. » On ne le revoyait pas avant 10 heures. Alors nous, on attendait, on mettait des coussins, des coussins comme ça en mousse, sur le sol, enfin, dans le fond de la caravelle, hein, et on dormait.
280 production Caravelles were completed between 1958 and 1973, flying for more than 150 operators worldwide over 45 years of service. Its introduction in 1959 was a huge success. Cutting flight times nearly in half and flying high above the weather opened up a wonderful world of smooth, comfortable travel. With its engines mounted at the rear and a streamlined nose section, the Caravelle had an extremely quiet forward cabin and cockpit. The lack of aerodynamic noise made it very popular with passengers and crew. Subsequent models had more powerful Pratt & Whitney JT8D turbo fans, stretched fuselages and aerodynamic improvements. The Caravelle was a pioneer in the development of a commercially suitable all-weather landing system, making the first automatic landing by a jet airliner in September 1962. 2 years later, after 3,500 automatic approaches had been logged by test aircraft, French certification was granted to ICAO Category 2 minima 100 feet, 30 metres ceiling, and quarter mile, 400 metres forward visibility. Further work led to Category 3A approval in March 1967, with a decision height of 50 feet, 15 metres, and visibility of 150 metres, the first such commercial certification. This led to the world's first automatic approach and landing by an air transport aircraft in revenue service and in actual Cat 3A weather conditions at Paris-Orly on January the 9th, 1969. Air France was the biggest customer for the Caravelle and operated a total of 48 between 1959 and 1981. With the operational peak reached in 1967, with 41 aircraft accounting for almost half the carrier's flying hours and serving 56 cities from Paris. With the arrival of a new generation of airliners, inspired ironically by the success of the Caravelle, the French twinjet began to leave the mainline fleets of major airlines. A second career with smaller national carriers and charter operators came to a close in Europe in the mid-1990s as ever more efficient airliner types appeared in a world of escalating fuel prices. Today's aircraft burn the same amount of fuel, carrying twice as many passengers over 3 times the distance. Caravelles continued to operate in Africa and South America well into the 21st century. The last Caravelle in regular passenger service flew for Gabon Express from Libreville for 18 months between July 1999 and May 2001. The final act was in the Congo, where Waltair operated the Caravelle until July 2005. The Caravelle in Munich was first flown from Toulouse on November 3, 1960. Being the 58th of the type built, it was delivered to Air France on November 10, 1960, named Poitou. It entered revenue service 3 days later, operating Paris, Düsseldorf, Hamburg, Düsseldorf, Paris. Poitou remained in service almost until the end of the Caravelle era with Air France, which came to a close in March 1981, operating its last service on 28th of August 1980 from Amsterdam to Paris-Charles de Gaulle Airport. It was ferried the same day to Paris-Orly and retired with 37,028 flying hours and 32,207 landings in its logbook. The aircraft was scrapped between November and December 1980. The nose was saved for a proposed conversion into a simulator for an air traffic control centre near Paris-Orly Airport. The project was abandoned due to costs. By 1994, the nose section had been transferred to La Ferté-Alais near Paris and was displayed at a local aviation collection. It starred in the French movie Belle Maman with Catherine Deneuve. By 2003, it had been stored outside under a tree, and its condition deteriorated quickly. Poitou received little attention up until the moment when a man fell in love with it.
Aviation has always played a major role in our family. My grandfather was a station manager for Scandinavian Airlines in Munich and Tokyo, and my father started flying for the Swedish Air Force in 1968 and joined Lufthansa in 1971, flying 707s. And my mother, she was a flight attendant for Air France on Caravelles and 707s, and later went to BEA and joined Lufthansa as well, and obviously that's where they met. So from the very early age, we were very close to airplanes and flying, and having grown up in Toulouse, the heart of European aviation, and my father being a test and instructor pilot for Airbus, my brother and me, we always wanted to become airline pilots. It's just very fascinating to grow up in that environment. And even before I finished school, I started my pilot training, and at age 22 became first officer on Fokker 70, Fokker 100, and soon after a flight instructor. And now 10 years on, flying Airbus wide bodies long haul, it's still the job of our dreams. I always had a passion for first-generation jet airliners, and the Caravelle in particular. Its elegant lines look so perfect. It's just like the Mona Lisa of aviation. And when I turned 30, I decided to fulfill all my remaining childhood dreams, and one of them was restoring a cockpit of a first-generation jet airliner. And so the Caravelle quickly came to mind, and I had been running a website on this airplane for a decade and had a pretty good idea where to look. And I traveled to Cuba, Italy, France, and Thailand, trying to get what I wanted. But there was always one in particular I wanted to buy, the one in La Ferté-Alais in Paris, an ex-Air France Caravelle. And I sent the owner a letter explaining my passion for this airplane and made them an offer, which got ignored. And I tried again. I don't give up that quickly. And we negotiated a sale, and 2 months later I took it to Munich. The cockpit was nearly complete, missing only very few parts, but further inspection revealed pervasive corrosion damage, and it was clear that this restoration would take many years. First thing to check was for any hazardous materials such as radioactive instruments or asbestos. Many instrument gauges built in the 1940s and 50s used glow-in-the-dark paint that contained radioactive radium. Fortunately, none of these materials were found in the cockpit. So I kept disassembling the cockpit, labeling every switch and piece, and discovered some interesting artifacts. A first-class boarding path was landmarked on it, and some research on the photograph revealed the Beatles actually flew on this particular aircraft in June 1964 from Manchester to Paris for a concert. A flight attendant probably kept the card as a souvenir and lost it in the forward galley between the cockpit and galley wall, where it was hidden for over 45 years. I even found this gold ring, which at some point was lost in the aircraft. So once the entire cockpit equipment was in labeled boxes and bags, I had to teach myself how to connect the switches, lights and gauges to the computer, and how everything interacts with the software and hardware. This was probably the steepest learning curve, but once you get the hang of it, things started to speed up. A wiring and documentation standard was set up, and then I started to rebuild the 24 panels, 420 switches and 80 warning lights. Each panel is stripped of its parts, sanded or sandblasted depending on its condition, and repainted in its original wrinkled paint finish. This paint was commonly used throughout the 1950s. Then each part is carefully tested and cleaned prior it is being reinstalled and rewired. Very often a thin layer of nicotine was found on the switches, which protected the metal from corrosion. Every rewired and soldered connector pin is labeled and documented for easy troubleshooting and maintenance. About 15% of switches and gauges were inoperative because of heavy corrosion. While some can be fixed, others remain dead. The hunt for spare parts has become increasingly difficult, and as the number of Caravals has been dwindling fairly rapidly over recent years, airports are cleaning up their corrosion corners, and liability issues usually prohibit the removal of any parts. Having visited several Caravals worldwide for spare parts, my only chance to get parts were back in 2004. I was very lucky to attend a scrapping of a former Finnair Caravelle built in 1964. It had been stored at Toulouse Airport for 6 years, and I was granted access and removal of anything I wanted. I could have even gotten the complete cockpit, but didn't have the means to transport and store it. So instead I filled up 3 car trunks with spare parts, seats and panels. So basically all spare parts for Poitou come from this aircraft. What I enjoy the most is seeing this old technology coming back to life and combining it with today's computer technology, making it work exactly like it used to when the aircraft was still in service. The cockpit was always described as extremely quiet, and this fuel counter making a clicking noise for every kilogram of burned fuel was often described as the only noise heard on the flight deck. I was able to change the original 115 volt magnet to a 12 volt magnet, and using some programming magic, interface it and make it work again. Eventually, 80% of all cockpit sounds will come from the original equipment. To create a realistic simulator of an aircraft, it is very important to have a deep understanding of the aircraft systems. Over the years, I have collected 40 different manuals with over 10,000 pages. While most answers to questions can be found there, some mysteries can only be solved visiting an operational aircraft. From the beginning of the project, I have been in touch with Le Caravelle Club in Stockholm Arlanda Airport. They own the world's last operational Caravelle. A group of enthusiasts is keeping it in ground-running conditions. And every now and then, the lovely sound of the Rolls-Royce Avonjets sounds over Stockholm Arlanda Airport.
then it will of course indicate 0 because you have the switch in the middle position there.
Yeah,
now if you put that to 28 volt, then you get the standby battery.
This is the world's very last Caravelle, which has all its systems still operational. Though it's not airworthy, it's kept in great condition by Ola Carlsson and his team. Going step by step through the original checklist, data about system behavior, noise levels, control forces and sounds are recorded.
If you move it to green,
this data will play a vital role in recreating the handling of the aircraft, allowing very realistic flights according to original checklists and manuals.
get more pressure. The indicators for the others over there.
But more questions arise. Having talked to many pilots, it was soon obvious that their knowledge was interesting but not very useful, as nearly all pilots start to mix up their Caravelle memories with other aircraft. Finally, I came across 2 very important books written by an ex-Air France captain in the early 1960s. These books have been considered lost for decades, and not even the archive of Air France had a copy, but one day they appeared on an online auction. This was a little breakthrough in the project, as in amazing detail Captain Dudal describes the handling and performance of the jet, from power setting, climb angles and bank angles. The flight simulator uses a computerized 3D model of the Caravelle to calculate its performance and flight dynamics. The more accurate the 3D model, the closer we get to the original performance. Using the books from Dudal and the performance data, we can now cross-check the flight behavior and fine-tune it, making it the most realistic Caravelle simulator ever made. I frequently get asked how I get the needles to move the way they should. Basically what I'm doing is tapping the data from the flight simulator and manipulate it with the switches and levers. Eventually everything in the real cockpit runs in parallel to the virtual simulated cockpit. The flight simulator software is so realistic, it's being used by many airlines and universities worldwide, and apart from the realistic flight models, it has a complex weather and system failure module. This adds to the realism, and it allows simulated bird strikes, engine malfunctions or instrument failures. Another challenge I'm facing is getting all instrument gauges to work. Some gauges can easily be interfaced using custom-made circuit boards. Others are either broken or running at 115 volt, which I want to avoid using in the cockpit. Digging deeper into the subject and looking for alternative methods of driving the needles, I came across the electric motors used in the dashboards of cars. These are readily available, cheap, easy to interface and have an extremely accurate needle movement. So little by little all remaining instruments will be converted using these motors. Repainting and polishing required a relocation of the cockpit, as München, Oberschleißheim and the pre-World War II hangars were not suited for these works. In October 2013, the cockpit was moved again by road to a new location 30 kilometers east of Munich. The new 100 square meter hangar, located in the lovely countryside of southern Bavaria, is the ideal place for the painstaking and messy repaint and polishing works. Polishing was very exhaustive and required several hundred hours, since I had to do it completely by myself, and every time coming home with a literally black face. Having carefully researched the exact colors and details for repaint, I was surprised that Air France actually got involved in this project and assisted in the remanufacturing of the main entrance titles. Finally, the big moment when masking and repainting begins. It turned out to be impossible to find a professional painter who was willing to repaint the nose section. So eventually I had to teach myself how to paint. After having practiced for over a year, I felt ready to repaint Poitou in September 2014. The paint job turned out very nice, and the moment when you apply the last detail, it's a moment of complete satisfaction, and it justifies all of the investment in time, money and effort to that point. Not just the cockpit and exterior received tender loving treatment, also the cabin will be refurbished into its original 1970s look. The area behind the cockpit was used for galley and wardrobe, which no longer exist. This free space will be used as a briefing room with flat screens and original carpet and wall art. The carpet was remanufactured to match the original used on this airplane. Every detail will be spot on. After all, it's the aim to recreate the impressions that a passenger would have had when he or she entered the aircraft. An exciting moment. To enhance this experience, a Fokker 27 stair has been acquired. This will probably be the world's only simulator that is boarded via an original aircraft stair through the aircraft's main entrance. To get all these details right, it is necessary to visit an original Air France Caravelle. This Caravelle, first flown and delivered to Air France in 1968, operated for a short period of time in the French West Indies, flying in and out of Miami Airport. It has been stored at Avignon near Marseille since 1981 and is being cared of by a group of volunteers and former Air France employees. Their aim is to create a living museum, and many of the aircraft's electrical systems have already been brought back to life.
A splendid array of finely curved bodies, though as yet without faces, sightless, sleeping in this great hall where the murmurs and voices mingle with the sound of riveting. What are their dreams?
The next steps are wiring up all the panels and lights in the cockpit and installing an air conditioning system. The control wheels and handles will be equipped with a so-called control loading that mimics the original control forces. Vibrators in each seat will give a realistic impression of aircraft vibrations. The key element of the simulator is going to be a giant 220-degree screen built around the nose section. A special software warps the image so it can be projected on a curved screen. This creates a full immersive view when sitting in the cockpit and allows to look through all windows and windscreens. I usually work around 20 to 30 hours a week on the project. Every now and then I get help from my family or friends, but basically I'm doing all the work myself. Restoration and building a simulator by its very nature is a long-term process marked by a seemingly endless series of incremental steps. When each step is done, there is a satisfaction in that separate item's quality of restoration, but its relationship to the whole is sometimes hard to see. It is an extremely versatile project covering so many areas of interest and allows us to improve and learn many new skills. Changing what was a rotten museum piece into a living, breathing piece of history, a time machine if you will, is very rewarding. Once complete, it will allow people to experience firsthand what it was like to fly an aircraft from the early jet age. It will educate and entertain and become a living piece of aviation history.
On aimerait bien entrer en contact avec les anciens PNT, PAC d'Air France qui ont travaillé sur les caravelles pour écouter vos histoires, vos mémoires, voir des photos ou vidéos, pour montrer aux gens, dans le futur simulateur, la vie des équipages à bord de la caravelle. N'hésitez pas à me contacter sur info@sudaviation.com. Merci.